Hi and welcome to the Unquendor Guitars workshop. My name is Daniel and yeah, it's been a while, but I'm back and it's time to build a new guitar. Before I start designing and building the new guitar, I want to mention a few things. For anyone who's been following me for a while now might have noticed the lack of content coming to the YouTube channel and my Instagram post and such. And that's because I've been working a lot on my day job. Unquendor Guitar is still some side business for me. I've also been working to try and grow the Unquendor Guitars business and actually start selling my guitars. And I had some things I wanted to change in my personal life as well. So that also took some time and some effort. And on top of that, I had some creative block, to be honest. But as I mentioned in a couple of videos ago, I really wanted to do another guitar building series. So without further ado, let's start designing a new guitar. And you may already have seen this guitar lurking in the background. It's the first serious electric guitar I bought some 30 years ago. And it's a Westone Pantera X390 in Caspian blue. It is said, and presumably this is a very rare guitar, it is said there were only 16 ever made in the factory. And yeah, I happen to own one of these guitars. It's a great guitar. If you look at the neck transition into the body is concave all the way through. It's a very good quality guitar. So I thought, why not make a tribute to my first guitar? So the first thing we need is a sheet of MDF, and I'm just going to use half a sheet, 9mm thick, to design the guitar and also straight away be able to make my templates from this sheet of MDF. So let's start designing this guitar. So here I have the actual guitar we're going to base our design on, or my design in this case, and I'm not going to fully copy this guitar. It's going to be an inspired guitar. And I always recommend to start with designing and laying out the neck. So that's what I'm going to do. I know I want a 25.5-inch scale length, a 43mm wide nut, and I'm going to use a Floyd Rose or a Schaller Floyd type bridge. So that's the most important measurements for any guitar, is the scale length and of course the layout of the fretboard, and the scale length and the body will come afterwards. So let's start by designing the neck and the headstock and figure the rest out later. So first thing I'm going to do is draw out a center line and set out the scale length for this guitar design. So let's first draw in a center line for the neck and the entire guitar. Move this aside a little. And I hope my lines will show up on camera. But here I have my center line. Now let's create a line for the nut. Mark it, nut line. And for the scale length, 25.5 inches, which is 648mm. Right there. And this is my scale length. Now for the rest of the neck. Start with measuring out the width of the nut, which is 43mm. Always double check your measurements. That's correct. And if you don't know the measurements of the parts you're going to use, go online and find the measurements you're going to need. I'm going to use a locking nut from Schaller, and it gives me all the dimensions on the website. As the same goes for the bridge I'm going to use. And the E to E string measurement is 54 millimeters. So at the scale length I'm going to mark out 54 millimeters. After marking the width of the nut, I'm going to mark the E to E spacing. And on this drawing from Schaller, it says it's 3.9 millimeters from the edge of the nut to the center of the string, or the thick E string, the low E. And on the high E string, it's 3.6 millimeters from the edge to the center of the string. I want the edge between the string and the edge of the neck, so the distance between the string and the edge of the neck to be consistent along the entire length of the neck. So on the both on the bridge side, so at the end of my scale length, and at the nut, I'm going to mark out where my E strings are going to be. So on the nut side I have to subtract these measurements from the 43 millimeters of the nut width, and of course on the bridge side I have to add these 3.6 and 3.9 millimeters on either side of the E to E spacing I just marked out. So this will be the outside of the neck. Now with all the marks made, I can draw the outline of the neck, going from the nut to the bridge. So now the main outline of the neck is done, and this is almost the most complicated design part of the entire guitar. Easy, isn't it? Let's draw in the length of the fretboard. And to do so I have a very handy helper. It's my fret slotting template, and it has slots cut in where all the frets are going to be. So first slot is of course the nut. And the last one is the end of the fretboard. So it's here, and I can also mark out all the frets. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And of course, mark out the 12th fret. 12th, nut, and the fretboard. So I hope you can see it a little better now. I went ahead and used a black fine liner to hopefully make my lines show up more on camera. So this is now our fretboard and the outline of the neck. Next I'm going to determine how much of a tenon I would like to have inside the body of the guitar. So, and to determine the tenon, or whatever you like to call it, for the end of the neck, of course I'm going to allow my neck to run a bit further underneath the neck pickup. So I'm going to take a pickup ring, the one I'm going to use, or similar one I'm going to use for the actual guitar, and I'm going to use this to determine the end of the tenon for the neck. So this is the end of the fretboard. I'm going to place my pickup ring against the edge where the end of the fretboard is going to be, and I'm going to mark it, and usually it's about 42 mils, which it is. Again, draw a line perpendicular to the center line, and this will be the end of my neck. I know I'm going to use a 16mm router bit to route the neck pocket once I'm building the guitar. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a circle drawing jig or ruler and use the 16mm hole to indicate the rounded edges of the neck. Just like so, and this is just for me, so I know this is where the neck is going to end. And now I can start designing the headstock. Designing a headstock can be tricky, but in this case I already have an example to go from, but there are some things I like to change on my guitar. First thing is, this headstock has a double nut. You can see there's a regular nut right up against the fretboard, and there's a locking nut right behind it. This is something you sometimes see on guitars, especially from the 80s, with floating bridges, floating tremolo style bridges. The downside is when you tune the guitar and you lock the locking nut, usually the strings all go a bit sharp, so you have to take that into account when tuning this guitar. So that's something I'm going to avoid by just using a regular lock nut right up against the fretboard. And another thing I don't like as much on this guitar is the fanning of the strings. I like a little bit more straight string pull on my headstock, so that's what I'm going to design in the new headstock. So I'm going to try and be as close to the original as possible, but with the features altered the way I like them. And another thing I'm going to do is make sure I can make this neck from the standard Unquendor style neck blanks. And those are 100mm wide, and I don't like gluing extra wood on the sides to fit a larger headstock. So those are the restrictions I'm going to work with. Straight string pull, regular locking nut, and a regular Unquendor Guitars neck blank. The first thing I need to do is make sure I can fit a Charlotte locking nut, and the locking nuts are 15.4mm deep or wide, or whatever you call this measurements. So that's the space I'm going to reserve here at the end of the fretboard. Elongate these lines. And this is the space where my nut is going to sit. Let's design the rest of the headstock. To make designing the headstock a bit easier, I always like to draw in the strings first. So I'm going to look up the drawing for the locking nut, and here I can see the string spacing for this nut. So I'm going to draw in some strings. Try to be as accurate as you can. I'm using calipers to determine the string spacing. But yeah, of course you can also use a ruler, just what works for you best. But main thing is be precise. Now with my strings drawn, I'm going to determine where my tuner holes are going to be to get this angle, and from this angle I can work out the rest of the shape of the headstock. First I'm going to measure the distance from the edge of the fretboard to the first tuner, and approximately 50 millimeters. I'm going to use Charlotte locking tuners, and they have a post diameter of about 5.5 millimeters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in the 50 millimeters from the edge of the fretboard to the center of the tuner hole. Take my circle drawing guide, use the 6 millimeter hole and draw it tangent to the string line. And this will be the post of the tuner, and to find the center I can just measure 3 millimeters from the string to the center of the circle, make a little mark, and this will be the center of my tuner hole. Next thing I'm going to do is determine the spacing between the tuners. I usually use 25 mils for my guitars, but on this guitar it's 24 mils. So I'm going to use a compass, set it to 24 mils and mark the positions for the new tuners on this headstock. A little trick I like to share with you guys to set the spacing on your compass is to just draw in a line, mark out the dimension you want, so in this case 24 mils, and use this to accurately set your compass. So with the compass set to the correct spacing, I'm going to mark out all the positions for the tuners, and I know if you're going to calculate it and take the string thickness into account, all the tuners should be spaced differently to get exact straight string pull, but I think it looks better, it's aesthetically more pleasing to have all the tuners spaced the same instead of taking the string thickness and maybe the string spacing on the nut into account. It makes it so much easier to do it like this. It looks a bit better, and the small deviation it gives you in string pull isn't really noticeable, at least not as much as the tuners not being equally spaced. So it's always a compromise. So I hope this shows up on camera, but I've got my marks, and keep in mind these are the marks for the tangency of the string posts or the tuner posts, and these are not the center points of the tuner holes. These are the marks that determine where the string post is going to touch the actual string, and this is where the string post will be. Now that I've got my tuner position figured out, I've drawn a line through the center of all the new tuner holes, and this will be this angle for the headstock. And next thing I need to figure out is how far does my edge need to be from the center of the hole. Well, usually it's somewhere in between 12 and 15 millimeters. I usually like to use 12 millimeters, which is, I think, yeah, the same on this guitar. It's 12 millimeters from the center of the tuner post to this edge of the headstock. So let me draw in that line on the new headstock parallel to this line that's going through the centers of the tuner post. Nice and long line, so I can start designing the rest of the headstock. So make sure when designing your headstock you take the back of the tuner into account and how it sits on the headstock, so you're sure you have enough space to fit the screws, or at least to fit your tuners when the headstock is done. So give it some space. I want to end up somewhere around here. Right, this needs to come to some sort of a point. Something like this maybe. This is a very shallow or big radius curve right here to about 70 mils from the end of the fretboard. It's about here. And you don't have to be as precise with these measurements. These are just the outline shape of the headstock. The precision work, determining your nut, string spacing and tuner positions, that was the accurate part, and this is just a design part, and you can do whatever you want as long as you take into account that you can still fit your tuners once the headstock is done. So here is the final design for our headstock, and as you can see I also took an Unquendor inlay and made sure it still fits on this headstock design and it doesn't interfere with these mounting rings for the tuners at a later stage. And what I do maybe is even make the inlay a bit smaller so it fits even a bit better on this headstock design. Let's continue designing the rest of this guitar. With most of the design for the neck and headstock out of the way, it's time to start designing the body, and I'm going to replicate this design pretty close, although there are some features like with the headstock and the neck I'm going to change and make it more of my own. For example, this body is slightly asymmetric, and that's something I don't like, and I don't like these curves and the shape at the bottom of this guitar, so that's something I'm going to change just a little to make it more symmetrical and make it more of my own. What is going to stay is the extreme roundovers on this guitar, and of course the convex or concave body shape and neck and body transition. So yeah, let's start designing this body. So this is the neck and the headstock design all done, nice and easy. So let's focus on the body, and the first thing I'm going to do is mark where the body hits the neck at which fret. So it's at the 19th right here, and at the treble side it's at the 21st. So let me make some marks and we can design the body going from there. So the 21st, end of the fretboard, 24, 23, 22, 21st. And I often get a question where I get my protractor, and I'll make sure to leave a link to an Amazon affiliated link to these protractors. They're made by Incra and they're available in both metric and imperial as well. This is of course a metric one, but you can find them in imperial as well. So make sure to check out my tools list in the description down below. So this is 21st, 2019, it's right here. $19, $18, $17, $15, $14. Yep. Always double check. So I went ahead and I've drawn a box to similar dimensions as the global outline of the existing body onto my piece of MDF, and I went ahead and transferred some of the measurements, some of the key measurements of the existing body. For example, where the top horn ends. I took a ruler and looked at which fret as a reference point the end of the top horn was positioned, and it's at the 14th fret approximately is where the top horn ends. And I also took a dimension from the center line of the neck to the end of the horn, and this is approximately 12 centimeters, so 120 mils for the horn. So I took the 14th fret and made a little mark where the top horn is going to end. Same goes for the highest arc, the highest point on the arc of the top horn. It's approximately at the 15th fret and about 143 millimeters for the highest point of this arc. So I also transferred that dimension onto my sheet of MDF, as well as where the neck rest or the leg rest carve is on this body. And this is something I'm going to change a little. This body is slightly asymmetric and the bottom part is a bit wider than the top part, something I don't particularly like on this guitar. I don't like asymmetrical guitar shapes. So this shape I'm going to change a little, so it's more like this shape right here. As you can see, this turn, this curve is a bit tighter than the top one, and I prefer the top one. So what I did, I took a measurement from the back of the body approximately to the highest point or the deepest point of this carve. Same goes for how wide the body is at the narrowest point, which is only 20 centimeters. You can see it's a very slim waistline, so to say, on this guitar. So I took all those dimensions and transferred it to my piece of MDF, and now I can connect all these points and somewhat make this shape or transfer that shape onto my MDF and give it a bit of my own twist. So let's start connecting some of these marks and see if I can come up with a similar shape to the existing guitar, but with an Unquendor Guitars touch to it. I've got one half of the guitar sketched in, so it's time to do the other half. And I went ahead and made marks along the center line with increments of 50 millimeters. And what I can do now is use my ruler at the first mark and take a measurement to my line and transfer the measurement to the other side. And now with all these marks made, I can draw in a line. And this is somewhat symmetrical, and now I can tweak the shape of this body until I'm happy. And of course I have to design the lower horn. Maybe something like so. Let me tweak this a little off camera, but this is the main method I use to design my body shapes. Yeah, designing the guitar body is the creative side of building a guitar, and essentially anything goes. Of course, there are some things to keep in mind when it comes to the body shape. For Unquendor guitars, I like to make my guitars as comfortable as possible, so playability is always top of mind when I'm designing my guitars. For example, the position of the leg rest and how does the guitar sit when you play it sitting down and holding it on your lap, or how does the guitar fare when it's on a strap and you have to take it out on stage. Does it have neck dive? Is the body too heavy? Does it want to raise the neck or lower the neck? Those are all things to consider when designing a guitar. And of course, very large and outrageous body shapes might hinder your playing ability. If you have to reach over some point sticking out from the body shape, yeah, it might not be the most easy guitar to play on stage, for example. It might look cool having all kinds of weird points and weird shapes on your guitar, but keep in mind that it has to be playable as well. To get a nice and crisp and consistent outline for my guitar body, I am using French curved rulers, and they can be a bit tricky to get used to and how to work with these rulers, but yeah, I highly recommend them. So if you're not familiar with French rulers, yeah, go check them out. Watch a couple of tutorials that are no doubt here on YouTube, and they will help you to get a nice and consistent outline and maintain curvature or maintain tangency between your curves. That can be a bit hard to do when drawing curves by hand. So at this point I'm pretty happy with the overall design of my guitar body. The last thing I want to do is check for symmetry, and this is the last tip for this video to make absolutely sure my body is symmetrical. I'm going to take a piece of tracing paper, stick it to my template or to the piece of MDF or the design. You can also do this if you're designing on paper. Draw in the center line. Put in the pencil. Draw in the center line and trace the body outline on one side of the guitar. And now I can flip my tracing paper align the center line, and if needed, make some adjustments to the drawing underneath. I'm going to take my scalpel and just make a couple of marks. And I wasn't that far off, just this corner here needs a little tweaking. And after some cleaning up, I've got my guitar design ready to go. In the next episode, I'm going to turn these designs into templates I can use to cut and route both the guitar body and the neck. So yeah, keep an eye out for that episode if you're interested, and I hope to see you all there. But until then, have a nice week.